The US is warning that Russia wants to annex large parts of eastern Ukraine. A senior official said the US believes Moscow is planning sham referendums in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. Meanwhile, Ukrainian fighters in the Azovstal steelworks in Mariupol say Russian forces have resumed their assault after a brief ceasefire allowed for some evacuations. Elsewhere in Ukraine, both military targets and civilians are coming under fire.
A Ukrainian rocket making quick work of a Russian patrol boat in the Black Sea. Rockets and shells continue to rain down on targets on both sides of the conflict. Here in Lyman, in the Donetsk region, civilians are once again among the dead and injured, as their homes are caught in the crossfire. Unfortunately, there are losses among the civilian population. As of now, we know of 2 deaths due to the shelling. Around 100 kilometers away, in Mariupol, there has been some relief for the people entrenched in the Azovstal steelworks. According to the Russian military, 126 people were able to flee during a lull in the fighting. Buses operated by the Red Cross and private vehicles took them to safety. Initial reports indicate around half chose to go to Russian-controlled territory, with the rest seeking safety in Ukrainian-held areas. Meanwhile, American diplomats have returned to Ukraine. They've set up operations in Lviv and have a strong message for Russian President Vladimir Putin.
I would say the message to Russia is you failed. Ukraine is still standing, the government is still functioning, and we're going back to Lviv first and then Kyiv to help the government.
There they will join their Hungarian and Danish colleagues who have already resumed their diplomatic missions in the Ukrainian capital.
DW's Fanny Fachar is in Kyiv, and she told me about the conditions the hundreds of people still trapped inside the Azovstal steelworks are having to bear.
Desperate and devastating. If you listen to what the deputy commander of the Azov regiment said yesterday, that they're trying to actually get to civilians inside, you have to imagine this is like a labyrinth of bunkers. There was immense shelling for the past weeks around that steel plant. As a result, some people can't even get to the entrance, let alone exit that place. And even if they do, the shelling has resumed shortly after this first group of people managed to leave on a Monday, which was really unprecedented if you look at the fact that already there were so many attempts trying to rescue people out of this heavily bombarded city of Mariupol, and how difficult this is. Within this context, the situation is becoming dire by the hour, not just by the day, but really by the hour. Access to clean water, access to actually oxygen, all of this is really making the situation for the civilians in there and also the wounded soldiers in there very difficult and inhumane.
Now, about half of the people who have been evacuated have decided to go to Russian-controlled territory. Do we know why that is?
It's a good question whether they really wanted to go to Russian territory, whether they were forcibly removed, just like we have seen happening, unfortunately, along the course of this war, that tens of thousands of people, according to Ukrainian information, have been forcibly removed from these occupied territories or partially occupied territories by Russia. We do not know exactly whether these people really left to Russian-controlled territory because they wanted to or because they didn't see any other option as they were trying to leave their agony from inside the steel plant or other parts of Mariupol. As a result, we can't really say that this happened as a fact. What we do know that one part of the group of people that could be evacuated went towards Zaporizhzhia, which is the neighboring region to Mariupol, which is Ukrainian-controlled, and others went on towards Russian-controlled territories.
DW correspondent Fanny Fachar reporting from Kyiv. Thanks for that update. And we can bring in Ruth Diamond now. She's a senior lecturer at the Department of War Studies at King's College London. Dr. Diamond, welcome to DW. Thanks for joining us. The US is warning, we've heard, that Russia plans to hold sham referendums in order to annex Donetsk and Luhansk, later Kherson. Does this suggest, would you say, that Russia is about to do what it did back in 2014 when it annexed Crimea?
Well, I think it suggests it's going to attempt to do that. But of course, the fundamental difference is that when Russia instigated the sham referendum in Crimea, it was actually in control of Crimea, and Russia is not having the success on the battlefield in eastern Ukraine that it wants. So it's going to attempt, if it does attempt to do this, to annex territory that it doesn't actually properly control.
Now, Russia is saying that about 1 million people have been brought from Ukraine to Russia since the war began. What evidence do we have to suggest that these were forced evacuations?
I mean, of course, it's very hard to say anything for certain. Firstly, it's always very difficult during conflict to say things with a high degree of certainty. And of course, then also we don't actually have access to the people concerned. But all the evidence seems to be that these are forced displacements into filtration camps inside Russia. And of course, that is a war crime or indeed a crime against humanity. So whatever the Russian government is saying about the displacement of these people, I think, there's no evidence that any of this is voluntary. And indeed, it's simply another of Russia's crimes against the Ukrainian people.
And the line in Russia about these evacuations, what the Russian people are hearing is that these people all came willingly.
Yes, that's right. And of course, that's precisely what you would expect the Russian government to say. It's part of their narrative. But, I don't think we should take that any more seriously than any of the other Russian claims about what's happening in this war.
Now, the EU is preparing a new wave of sanctions, including an embargo of Russian oil. How do you think that is going to be received in Moscow?
I think it's going to be received extremely badly if it does go ahead. Clearly, the Russian government is very, very heavily dependent on energy revenues, and it clearly needs to continue to receive energy revenues to carry on prosecuting this war. So I think, further sanctions, particularly ones that really clamp down on Russian oil exports, for example, will go down very, very badly in Moscow.
All right. Ruth Diamond, Russia analyst from King's College London. Thanks so much for your time. Now, European Union energy ministers have been meeting in Brussels to discuss a ban on Russian oil imports. In a major policy turnaround, Germany says it will no longer oppose an immediate ban on Russian oil. Energy Minister Robert Habeck says Germany could withstand such a move and has already reduced its dependence on Russian energy supplies. EU ministers are also discussing ways to prepare for a possible total Russian gas shutdown over Moscow's demands for payments to be made in rubles. Poland and Bulgaria have already been cut off after refusing Moscow's demands. DW's Terry Schultz is in Brussels. She has more on whether the EU's ban on Russian oil could go ahead.
Well, it certainly helps that Germany will no longer block that move. But again, you've got Hungary and Slovakia saying they don't want to follow that line. It's expected that EU ambassadors will begin discussing a draft of the package of sanctions that would include a ban on Russian oil this week, and that Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen could announce this sixth package later this week. But it may be that Hungary and Slovakia could be given some kind of exemptions in order to get that package passed.
Israel has summoned the Russian ambassador and demanded an apology after Russia's foreign minister claimed Nazi leader Adolf Hitler was part Jewish. Sergei Lavrov made the comments when speaking about Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, who is Jewish. Zelenskyy accused Russia of forgetting the lessons of the Second World War.
Interviewed on Italian television, Sergei Lavrov is challenged on Russia's claim to be fighting Nazis in Ukraine.
President Zelenskyy puts forward an argument saying, what kind of Nazification can we have if I'm a Jew? If I remember it right, I may be wrong, Hitler also had Jewish origins, so it doesn't mean anything at all. For some time, we have heard from the wise Jewish people that the biggest anti-Semites were Jewish.
Lavrov's words have caused outrage in Israel, which has so far avoided strong condemnation of Russia's invasion.
It's an unforgivable, scandalous statement, as you said, and also, of course, a terrible historical mistake, and we expect an apology. The Jews didn't kill themselves in the Holocaust. My grandfather wasn't killed by Jews. My grandfather was killed by the Nazis. To say that Hitler was of Jewish origin is like saying the Jews killed themselves in the Holocaust.
At Israel's Yad Vashem Holocaust Memorial, there was also condemnation at Russia's allegations of Nazism in Ukraine to justify its war.
Also, its use of Nazi terminology regarding the Ukrainian government and President Zelenskyy particularly is also a denigration of the term, is an offense, an affront to the victims of the real Nazism.
Historians say speculation about Hitler's ancestry is based on a debunked myth. Lavrov's use of the fallacy showed Russia had no concern for the victims of real Nazism, says President Zelenskyy.
These words mean that Russia's top diplomat puts the blame on the Jewish people for Nazi crimes. I have no words. Such an anti-Semitic thrust by their minister means Russia has forgotten all the lessons of World War II. Or maybe they never studied those lessons.
But Ukraine hasn't forgotten Russia's attack on Kyiv's television tower in the opening days of the war. The missiles fell close to the Babin Yar memorial site to massacre Jews. Holocaust survivors have condemned Russia's words and its bombs.